In 2026, the world stands at the precipice of a high-stakes showdown in the Middle East. Israel's looming decision on whether to strike Iran could reshape the global order. But here's the twist. It's not a simple yes or no. It's a matter of timing, strategy, and the uncertainty that fuels the entire equation. For years, Israel has played a dangerous game of deterrence with Iran, a nation rapidly advancing its nuclear program, while Israel tries to keep it in check. But as tensions have reached new heights, the game has changed. Iran's nuclear ambitions, combined with Israel's evolving military strategy, have left the world in a fragile equilibrium. The question isn't if Israel will strike, it's when. And that moment could come sooner than we think, as the strategic window narrows. But before we dive into the tactical realities, let's understand how we got here. At the heart of the Israel-Iran standoff lies an unresolved high-risk problem: the uncertainty surrounding Iran's nuclear capabilities. Since 2024, the stakes have been raised by a series of unprecedented direct attacks between the two nations. Israel, once seen as the region's undisputed military powerhouse, has demonstrated its willingness to strike Iranian strategic assets in order to slow down Tehran's nuclear progress. But here's the catch. While military actions have disrupted Iran's nuclear infrastructure, they've never fully dismantled it. Iran continues to stockpile highly enriched uranium and has retained key nuclear know-how, with international monitoring agencies struggling to gain full access. This leaves Israel in a precarious position, facing the constant threat of an Iranian breakout where Tehran could rapidly move toward nuclear weaponization undetected until it's too late. As the clock ticks down, Israel's decision-making becomes a game of thresholds, with every move dictated by the fear of an imminent nuclear crisis. The roots of this crisis stretch back over a decade, to the very moment Israel first saw Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat. By 2024, Israel had already taken steps to disrupt Iran's nuclear program, using a combination of cyber attacks and airstrikes. However, Iran responded aggressively, launching unprecedented direct attacks on Israeli targets. This marked a dangerous escalation. But Israel's strategy wasn't just reactive, it was calculated. In 2025, Israel shifted from discrete attacks to supporting large-scale operations aimed at degrading Iran's nuclear and air defense infrastructure. At the same time, Iran has continued to bolster its regional influence through proxy groups like Hezbollah, while rapidly advancing its missile and drone capabilities. This dual strategy of nuclear development and regional destabilization has created a volatile environment, one where neither side can afford to make a mistake. In this backdrop of conflict, Israel's strategy has become one of measured deterrence, with military leaders constantly recalculating the risks of any strike, knowing full well that every decision could ignite a wider regional war. By late 2025, tensions hit a boiling point. The first major crisis began when Iranian forces conducted a large-scale missile attack on Israeli assets, signaling that Tehran was no longer willing to back down. Israel's response was swift and decisive. It wasn't just a defensive move, it was a message. In retaliation, Israel launched airstrikes against Iran's strategic facilities, including its nuclear enrichment sites. But this wasn't just about military targets, it was about sending a clear signal: Israel would no longer tolerate Iran's nuclear progress unchecked. This move brought the two nations closer to direct conflict than ever before, with global observers watching anxiously. However, even as the dust settled, Israel faced a critical question. Did this attack truly disrupt Iran's nuclear program, or did it simply delay an inevitable march towards a nuclear weapon? The ambiguity of this moment created a cycle of uncertainty, where Israel had to decide whether its actions were enough to halt Iran's progress, or if further strikes were necessary to prevent a nuclear breakout. The world now braces for the next move, because if this cycle continues, the stakes could escalate even further. Let's take a closer look at the hidden dynamics shaping Israel's military strategy. Israel's military strategy is far from simple. At its core, it hinges on a series of thresholds, points where the balance of power shifts just enough to make a strike more likely. Behind the scenes, intelligence plays a critical role in determining these thresholds. Israeli planners are not just tracking Iran's nuclear stockpiles, they are closely monitoring the rebuilding of Iran's air defense systems, missile production capabilities, and nuclear enrichment facilities. If Iran begins to reconstitute these systems, especially after a strike, it sends a message to Israel: the window for action is closing. For Israel, the real fear isn't just about uranium stockpiles. It's the possibility that Iran could rebuild these facilities quickly and secretly, leaving Israel with no time to react before Tehran approaches a nuclear threshold. That's why every move is calculated in terms of when a strike is needed to prevent a breakout and how much damage it will cause to Iran's capabilities. If Israel believes it's not enough to disrupt, but rather to dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure, this could escalate tensions further. For now, it's a waiting game, one based on intelligence reports and assessments of when Iran might cross a critical line. As 2026 approached, a second crisis began to unfold. Israeli intelligence sources reported that Iran was making rapid progress in restoring its missile and air defense systems, crucial pieces of the puzzle in its ongoing military buildup. These systems, which had been damaged during the previous strikes, were now being rebuilt with alarming speed. In response, Israel ramped up its military readiness, aware that every day brought them closer to a critical moment. At this stage, the situation was increasingly fragile. Israeli leaders now faced a difficult decision: strike again to disrupt the rebuilding process, or hold back, hoping that diplomacy and international pressure would slow Iran's progress. The rhetoric from both Tehran and Jerusalem grew sharper, with Iran accusing Israel of meddling in its sovereignty, while Israel warned of dire consequences if Iran crossed the nuclear threshold. This mini-crisis was different from the first. This time Israel was not reacting to an Iranian provocation, it was acting preemptively, understanding that every delay in action could give Iran the time it needed to close the gap in its defenses and nuclear program. The stakes were higher, and the clock was ticking faster. As tensions rise, Israel faces a critical question: strike now or wait for the inevitable. Let's dive deeper into the personal toll this conflict is taking on both nations. For the citizens of both Israel and Iran, the mounting tension feels like a constant drumbeat of uncertainty. In Israel, the threat of missile retaliation is ever present, with residents living under the shadow of air raid sirens and the ever-watchful eye of the military. People wonder, how much longer can this precarious peace hold? For many, the possibility of a full-scale conflict is a daily fear, not just a distant threat. On the Iranian side, the situation is no less dire. Economic sanctions, internal unrest, and the constant pressure of international isolation weigh heavily on the people. Many Iranians feel the burden of their government's actions, which have not only affected their personal lives, but also dragged them into an escalating conflict with Israel. Protests have erupted, challenging the regime's authority, and there's a palpable sense of frustration. The human cost of these strategic decisions is high, but the question remains, who will bear the brunt when the dust finally settles? Let's look at the wider global consequences of this ongoing crisis. The Israel-Iran standoff is no longer just a regional issue, it has global ramifications. At the heart of this conflict lies the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil shipments. Iran's control over this vital waterway gives it significant leverage. If Israel strikes Iran's nuclear or missile facilities, the impact could ripple through global markets, disrupting not only energy supplies, but also maritime trade routes, including the Red Sea. The stakes are enormous, as any disruption in these strategic passages could send shockwaves through already fragile economies. Countries across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are closely watching, each with their own set of interests and vulnerabilities. The U.S., while providing military support to Israel, also worries about escalating tensions and the risk of spiraling into a broader conflict. Russia, with its ties to Iran, has already cautioned against further military escalation, sensing an opportunity to expand its influence in the region. The global economic fallout from any military escalation would be profound, and nations worldwide may find themselves forced to take sides in a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. As we look to the future, three potential scenarios unfold, each with its own risks and rewards. The first scenario is the best case. Diplomatic breakthroughs occur, and both Israel and Iran agree to a framework that limits Iran's nuclear development and restores international verification. In this scenario, global markets breathe a sigh of relief and the region stabilizes, but this remains a fragile peace, built on trust that could easily be shattered by further provocation. The second scenario is the middle ground, where tensions continue to simmer. Military skirmishes between Israel and Iran may persist, with occasional strikes on critical infrastructure, but a full-scale war remains avoided. In this environment, regional instability increases, but both countries, driven by a mutual fear of escalation, remain locked in a high-risk stalemate. Then there's the worst case. A full-scale war erupts. In this scenario, Israel's strikes trigger an all-out response from Iran, potentially involving Hezbollah, militias across the region, and even a broader conflict in the Gulf. This would cripple global energy markets, deepen regional divides, and destabilize not just the Middle East, but the entire global economy. The key question: which path will Israel and Iran take? Their choices will shape the region and the world for years to come. In the end, Israel's strategy towards Iran is not just about military action, it's a calculated dance of uncertainty, intelligence, and timing. With every move, Israel is trying to maintain a fragile balance, ensuring that Iran never reaches the point of nuclear breakout, while preventing a regional conflict that could spiral out of control. But this balancing act is precarious, and every misstep could lead to catastrophe. The world watches as these two nations, one with the fear of an existential threat, the other with the desire to break free from international isolation, make decisions that could reshape the entire Middle East. And as much as Israel's leaders may strive for a clean resolution, the reality is that this crisis is far from over. As the situation continues to evolve, it's crucial for global leaders to understand the complexities at play here. We must ask, will diplomatic efforts succeed, or will history repeat itself in another devastating cycle of conflict? Stay informed and keep asking the tough questions, because the outcome of this standoff will affect us all.